Hello, good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Now, let's begin with the Youth and Sports Minister, Syed Saddiq's 2-hour talk with some 100 food delivery riders who highlighted their problems as freelance workers in the gig economy. So after that gathering, Syed Saddiq then came to the conclusion that Malaysia needs a new law to regulate the gig economy and that he'd raised the issue at the cabinet meeting today.
Okay, so many questions come up in this story, Melissa. Partly, it begins with whether the government itself should have been involved in this particular dispute between a company and its workers, right? So there you have the issue of, government extending or overextending itself. And I know that you've been speaking to people in the business community about this. What's their take on what's happened?
Yeah, well, I think that's precisely the case. That people that I've spoken to within the business community feel like this is an example of the government overextending itself into what is a private business matter. Now, I understand that the riders staged a strike because they, are protesting this new payment scheme. But it is, if there are established methods for them to raise their grievances with the company itself. So, for Syed Saddiq to have asked these riders to come to his house and have a discussion. Now, whether he should have gotten involved in this is actually up for debate, because while there is a private business element, there's also a social component, right? Yeah, so he can raise it because it has to do with youth and youth unemployment. Yeah,
and also because of the promise, and that's been touted, that somehow the gig economy is going to solve the problem of youth unemployment. And our youth unemployment situation, of course, is most acute with our graduates. And so there we have, I think on a regional basis, some 10% of our graduates, unemployed or underemployed, working in jobs that are, in some ways, that don't fit their particular skill set, at least not what they learned at university. Now, the other problem in this is an interministerial thing, right? Is this properly under the ambit of
the Youth and Sports Ministry?
Or the Human Resources Ministry?
Which the Human Resource Ministry has said they're going to step in and probe these grievances. But you're right. I mean, whether there seems to be a bit of an overlap here, or whether the Youth and Sports Ministry has overreached itself in coming in looking into this matter. But at the heart of it now, there's going to be a proposal to look at the gig economy. And I think it's one that's quite timely because, again, just using this as an example, this case of the food delivery riders as an example, it boils down to the question, are they workers or are they entrepreneurs, right? Are they entrepreneurs or
freelancers?
Freelancers, that's right.
And because the contracts that they've signed in the past kind of characterizes them as freelancers. Now, the other problem, of course, has to do with the suggestion that these workers are exploited. Something that perhaps the Minister of Youth and Sports kind of was too quick to align himself with that narrative that they exploited. The question in the gig economy often is whether individuals exploit themselves. So they work harder than normal workers do.
They hustle.
Well, they do their 12 or 15 hours, and actually in some local media have done some rough calculation about how much people are making, and they suggest some incredible figure.
Yeah, so there was this incredible piece in the Malaysian Insight that suggested that if you do work, ridiculous hours like 12 or so more hours, you could make between 4,000 to 7,000 ringgit as a food delivery partner.
And of course, young entrepreneurs often work very, very long hours because they want that kind of success.
But hopefully not 12 hours, Sharaad?
I don't know, because when you're an entrepreneur, 12 hours is perhaps nothing. You're perhaps thinking about your business, 24/7 or maybe 18 hours a day.
True. But one silver lining that has come up from this, well, at least the one that I can find, is the fact that this is a group of young people that have organically organize themselves around their employment rights. And I think that this, after so many years of suppression in terms of union organizations, this is encouraging, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, something that we might want to park under the democratic dividends of the new Malaysian. That is, and we have to look at this too, Melissa, to what extent is this government going to encourage workers to unionize, to come together in a free association to support their own rights? And I think that is something saying. We have a huge worker population, but only 10% or so are actually unionized. And that, of course, has had an effect on wage levels too. Wage suppression, or the lack of the negotiating power of the working class in Malaysia, partly due to worker union suppression.
All right. Now, it's also been revealed today by the police that Bukit Aman has thwarted some 25 planned terrorist attacks in the country since 2013. Now, some of these plans include attacks at houses of worship and entertainment outlets here within the Klang Valley.
Now, this story, of course, is not just about thwarting those very organized groups, but also perhaps the larger question of the kinds of narratives that are spun out in sort of mainstream Malaysia that add fuel to the fire, that feed the machine of hate. We have, in recent times, the case of the factory supervisor who was murdered by a younger colleague who had been sacked, and some politicians came out to say that this was because the factory supervisor, the old Indian woman, had insulted the Prophet, and that he had done this in order to save the dignity of the religion. And when he was gunned down by the police, they said that he was a martyr. Now, those kinds of narratives actually feed, because
it's the root cause, right? It's the root cause of this.
In fact, we have had instances of jihadists in Malaysia. One, of course, that we could pull up this particular story. He returned from Jakarta after having spent 12 years in prison in Jakarta for the Jakarta Mall bombing. He lost a leg in it. He had no regrets. And for him, the murder of children and women was an unfortunate situation of collateral damage. Now, if those individuals remain in this country, they're not in jail, and they continue to speak about their experiences of bombing and hurting and harming innocents, what kind of net influence will they have on society? I think that's very disturbing.
Okay, well, still, I'm gonna find the silver lining again. The silver lining again
is that our counterinsurgency teams are
effective.
Super. Yeah.
They are super and effective, and credit where credit is due. All right, moving on to the Tanjung Piai By-Election. The Election Commission has announced that nomination day for the Tanjung Piai By-Election will be held on September 2nd that's 2nd of November, and there will be a 14-day campaign period. So that means polling day will take place on Saturday, November 16th.
Right. So, okay, the dates are in dispute now because those individuals who feel that the MCA and UMNO are kind of hurt by the dates that have been selected because they have events.
Well, UMNO General Assembly is on polling day, and I believe at that point in time when it was announced, MCA's AGM was on the same day, but the latest is that they have announced that they're going to postpone it.
Right. So the critics of the Election Commission saying, well, now you have an Election Commission working at the behest of the Pakatan Harapan. If the charge previously was that the Election Commission was working at the behest of Barisan Nasional, now it's in reverse. And some people are saying, well, it's no different in the new Malaysia. In the new Malaysia, those institutions that were supposed to be neutral are in fact quite political. Now, those, as we're critics of the critics, are saying, well, in the past, when we have that Wednesday, polling date, you didn't complain. Now, that the shoe's on the other foot, you're complaining, boo-hoo.
But, the EC has come up with this extraordinary explanation. I mean, this isn't just a unilateral kind of decision. I mean, they explained the rationale for picking these dates. And I have to say, I'm quite satisfied with the explanation. Although I'm not satisfied with the fact that 18-year-old voters cannot vote in this elections.
So that's the extraordinary kind of gap in this. 18-year-olds can stand for election, but they cannot vote. So if you're a candidate in this by-election, you can't vote for yourself. Now, how odd is that?
That is rather odd. Okay, after this, we're going to take a closer look at Singapore's anti-fake news law, which comes into effect today. Stay tuned to consider this.